Hi, this is Eric. This is Desert Pitfall, Part 1 Details, Binary Layers and Mask Oh My. So, in the Collision Manager, which I have a earlier video about, we saw that I'm actually comparing my collision layers and collision masks before I actually store my colliders as a pair. And I'm doing a bitwise AND operator to do this. So first, let's just talk about what that's doing as the AND operator. So if you've got binary, you got your bits, and you've got this, and you AND it to something else. So another number whose binary looks like that. And right now, we don't actually care what the value is of these numbers. What's more important for our situation is where those ones and zeros are in relation to each other. So what column are they in? But if we AND these together, for every column, we look at each row, and only if they're both ones do we receive a 1 at the bottom. So 0, 1 is a 0, 0, 1 is a 0, 0, 0 is a 0. Even though they're the same, there's no 1, so there's 0. And then 1, 0 is 0. And so this would evaluate to false. Now if we do a different number, and we combine this, and look at this number, then we'll get a 0, 1 for 0. 0, 0 are the same, but no 1s. 1, 0, and then finally we have a 1 and a 1. Oops, sorry, that's a 0. Finally we have a 1 and a 1, which gives us our 1. And this would evaluate to true. So that's our bitwise AND. So if we go and actually look at what am I using for my layers and masks? Well, this is my base game object, and it's got this collision ID enum, which is just actually a bunch of binaries. So the 0b lets us know we're looking at a binary number. Everything after that is the number. And you can use a little apostrophe to break these up into manageable chunks, because as these get bigger, it's a little more tedious to kind of pick through and figure out what number they're supposed to be. So it's just a little separator. So all my objects have both a layer and a mask. And the layer is where you exist. So the player would be on the player layer, which is 0001. We actually don't care about all the preceding zeros, but this makes it easier to line up to things we're going to compare to. I am skipping the beginning 0 comma or 0 apostrophe because nothing really goes that far except for level, and we're not going to deal with him. So our player layer is here, and our player would most likely be interested in obstacles. So that's his mask. And then you have your obstacle object, and he's got his own layer, and he's going to live on the obstacle layer, and then the obstacle will have a mask, and he's going to care about, hey, have I hit a player? So now, if we look at our collision manager, when we have these two objects interacting with each other, we've got the collision layer, so we've got the player layer, and he's going to say, hey, the mask of the obstacle is what we AND it to, and the mask of our obstacle is the same thing. We don't really have to do this math here because we can see that, yeah, we've got a match. And we could flip it around, and it also checks the opposite, so it checks the obstacle layer to the player's mask. Now, that seems redundant, but if you have an object that is going to be kind of touching everything, whatever it is, and every time you add a new object, you would have to remember to go back to the big object and add it to its mask and say, hey, remember, you want to touch this. And sometimes you'll forget to do that, and actually, I just don't do that. What I do is I have the big object, he's got his layer, and maybe a mask of some other very important stuff. And then every new object that I add to the game that needs to collide with it, they'll just add that big object to their mask. And that way I don't have to constantly remember, oh yeah, I've got to go and increase this guy's mask. Maybe if I was doing a more proper kind of game, maybe that's what you should do, but this is a little easier to maintain. I don't have to keep going back and increasing the mask size of something else. But that's why we do both checks, even though it's a little redundant. But we do short circuiting. So I think, if the first thing turns true, then it's going to just continue on. It's not going to check the second thing anyway. So that's kind of how this is happening. But your game is going to have a variety of objects, most likely. Mine does. Well, it's going to. Right now, it's a little more simple. And you're going to have things that have multiple masks. Like the player is going to be interested in obstacles and maybe power ups and, enemies and all types of other stuff out there. So, how are you going to do that? You could have like an array of masks and then you just have to loop through the mask and compare it to the layer. But if you're doing all that right here in the middle of your collision manager step, that's not going to be great. So we're going to avoid that. And it's very easy to do that because we can just use the bitwise or operator. So just like it's Big Brother, you've got this. The bitwise is always just one less. And so how the or operator works is if we go back to our game objects and say, all right, the player is interested in, here's our player layer 0001 and his mask. He's interested in both obstacles and whatever this other item is, which is just that. And the other could be a power up, an enemy, I don't know yet. But he's interested in both. So instead of making an array of masks, we're just going to use the bitwise OR and combine these guys. And the OR operator goes through the same method as the AND operator, except that if either row has a 1, then we get a 1. So 0, 1, yeah, there's a 1. You have 1, 0, yeah. No more zeros, no more 1s. So the rest is that, and this is true. So now we've got a new mask that's a combination of two other uh, binaries or collision IDs. And so now you can see there's very important that each of these ones over here is in its own column. There's no overlapping, so that when we combine them, we know that we have two separate objects. And so now, if we were going to do our comparison, and we would say, all right, here's my player layer, or not player layer, sorry. Let's say we've run into an object, so that's the object's layer, but this is the player mask. He's interested in this. Well, yeah, now we can see that, yep, there's a hit there. And if we have the other object, and again, we look at the player mask, whoop, then we again have hit. And if we have something else that we run into, like say there was another, another player on the map, and whoop, I'm all over the place. Wow, very, very good. Then that is false, right? We didn't hit that guy. So that's how the collision and layer mask system is working in my game. Um, I didn't come up with this. I didn't come up with a lot of my ideas. Uh, using bitwise operators this way is nothing new, but I first saw it in Godot, and they had a little collision system on the right, and you could check the layers and the mask for all your objects, and that was very new to me, and it took me a while to wrap my head around, but I really like it, and so I just kind of implement a version of that everywhere. And if you look at finally one of my game objects, that is actually how we initialize the every game object. We give it the layer it exists on, and we give it the things it cares about. So our obstacle cares about the player and the camera because in my game at the moment, if you hit the camera will tell you or mark you to be visible for that scene. So the renderer draws you. But um, yeah, so that's how this is working. It's a really cool system. I like it a lot. But thanks for sticking around and see you later.